This is Dr. Azadeh Kushki, and she's the lead of the informatics platform in Pond.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here, and thank you so much for your patience. I know we've rescheduled a few times, but we're here finally, so great to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing with technology in Pond. Just some disclosures. I'm the developer of a technology called Holly, which is what we're going to be talking about, and if it is commercialized, I will financially benefit from its sales. I'm also an advisor to several tech companies who are developing products for neurodivergent kids and have received consulting fees. Also received funding from a number of organizations listed there. Also, in terms of positionality, I am an engineer. I'm not a clinician, so you're going to hear a very different story about emotion regulation from the perspective of an engineer. But let me start by talking about why we look at technology. You know, we're hearing a lot about screen time and its potential negative impacts on kids. So why is it that we're saying we should use technology? And this is for all the kids in the room. My own kids use this to negotiate for screen time with me all the time. So not all screen time is created equally. There are definitely benefits for using technology for kids. Technology can be engaging and motivating, and you know, all the kids in the room would love to hear your thoughts on this. We never have to ask a kid to use an iPad twice. Technology can be anywhere, anytime. I'm seeing the kids in the room, some of whom are on technology right now. The great thing, I think, for neurodivergent kids is that technology can be personalized. You can play whatever content that you want to play. You can change the volume. You can change the brightness of the screen. You can rewind and fast forward as many times as you want. So lots of opportunities there to meet the unique needs and interests of each child. Technology is predictable. You watch a video the first time, the second time it's exactly the same thing. You play a video game, the second time it's exactly the same thing. There's also a lot of control and agency that can come with technology, and part of this is this idea of personalization. You can control what your avatar is doing in a video game. You can control how you want to watch the content. You can control if you're going to rewind or fast forward. And then finally, technology can be neurodiversity affirming. We can build on the strengths of each individual kid, the strengths, the interests of each individual kid, to have content that's motivating and engaging. In our communities, technology has been used for many different applications. There is communication technologies like AACs, quite often used in education, lots of educational apps out there. I think most kids in school right now are on laptops and online forums as well. Technology has been used in interventions, everything from video modeling to apps to even robots. Technology is used a lot for skills training. So for example, there's virtual reality for practicing for job interviews and social skills. Entertainment is a huge one. You know, watching videos, video games, that's really huge. Technology can also be used for advocacy and support, so lots of social networking groups, parent groups, and other support groups that are run on technology-based platforms. And then technology for some kids can help facilitate participation, and we saw some of this during the pandemic with the remote participation. In some situations, this type of remote virtual attendance can remove some of the stressors and barriers of being there in person. So today, I want to talk about one specific technology that we've been developing with Pond for the past 10 years or so. This has gone through different names. Initially, it was called Anxiety Meter. We heard from parents and kids that, you know, the word anxiety in there is actually anxiety provoking, so we took that out. Now it's called Holly TM. And the goal of Holly is to support emotion regulation, which we just heard about, but we're doing this outside of clinical environments in everyday settings using wearable technologies. So we just heard from Dr. Williams on emotion regulation. I am not going to talk about that again, but just to say that emotion regulation can impact our ability to control the intensity and duration of our emotions, and can have an impact on participation and quality of life. Okay, so we heard the clinical perspective on emotion regulation, which was actually really quite comprehensive, but I don't think you've ever heard an engineer's description of emotion regulation. So here it is. Engineers view things as systems. So this is the systems view of emotion regulation. You have the person, and that person comes with their unique biology, with their cognitive skills, with their coping strategies, past experiences, sensory experiences, and many of the other factors that we heard about from Dr. Williams. So that's your system. Then we have inputs into the system. We're in an environment where we get lots of different demands on us. There could be social demands, cognitive demands, there's aspects of understanding and acceptance, there's sensory demands. These inputs go through the system, interact with the strategies that we have, our biology strategies, and then there's outputs of the system. And these are the behaviors that we see. So in case of emotion dysregulation, we've heard about some of the potential behaviors that we may see: avoidance, intense emotional reactions, shutdowns, and so on. So if we want to understand emotion regulation, we can really look at the inputs of the system itself, and the outputs of the system. What we typically are able to do is to look at the outputs of their system. So we don't see a person's biology if we're just looking at them, but we can see the behaviors. We can see that a child is having an intense reaction, or we can see that somebody's shutting down. But often by the time we see that in real time, it's too late to intervene and de-escalate. We can somewhat see the environment, but the environments can be complex. There are so many different factors that can go into generating this response, and it's often difficult to characterize all of those triggers, especially if you're not particularly familiar with a child. So in a school environment, for example, where you have 30 kids in a classroom, it's very difficult for the teacher to sit there and isolate what the actual challenge is. So what about the person? Well, that's one area where we can start to look at this. And the specific person attribute that we looked at here was physiology. So here it is. This is our autonomic nervous system. So this is the part of our nervous system that modulates the function of our organs, like our heart and various organs. The exciting thing about the autonomic nervous system is that it modulates our arousal levels. So think about this as our fight or flight response. When we get scared, when we get panicked, all of a sudden you can feel your, maybe your palms are getting sweaty, your heart is beating. That's the part of our nervous system that modulates that. The great thing about this is that it can actually be measured using technology that is quite simple. So we can measure these types of arousal observations using wearables like smartwatches. And these are smartwatches that are available commercially. Many families currently have access to these. If you have an Apple Watch or a smartwatch, you can see that many of them actually measure your heart rate. And this is the particular measurement that we wanted to use to look at arousal levels. What are the advantages? Well, you can just wear it on your hand, anywhere, anytime, relatively accessible, relatively inexpensive. There's low stigma attached to it. If a kid wears a smartwatch at school, people are not going to be staring at them, wondering what that technology is. In fact, it has a bit of a cool factor attached to it. It can also measure physiological responses in real time, so it can continuously measure your heart rate in real time wherever you are, as well as some environmental data. So some of these smartwatches can actually provide us with other information, like the amount of movement, the amount of noise in the environment, and so on. So we have these really cool devices that can measure our heart rate, but does it actually tell us anything about emotion regulation and arousal? And this is the first study that we did with Pond. We had asked kids to come in. We got them to do different activities, some that were relaxing, some that were a little bit more stressful, and we looked at the heart rates. And what we saw was that there was a clear pattern of increases in heart rate when we engage in these stressful activities, which is kind of intuitive. When you get nervous, your heart rate increases. So not a huge surprise there. But the plots that I'm showing you here, where you see that we're going from this low baseline to the high baseline, these are averages of heart rates over 10 minutes of time. So on average, if you look on a calm movie that you're watching versus a 10-minute period of public speaking, you will see these differences. But how do we do this in real time? If you have a kid in front of you right now who's wearing the watch, you obviously don't want to wait 10 minutes to see if they're dysregulated or not, because by then you see the behavior, it's kind of too late. How do we do this in real time? Turns out it wasn't as easy. So this is a plot of heart rate in real time. You see on the right side, that's where we're relaxed. In the middle is a stressful task, which is public speaking, and in the end, again, it's relaxing. Kind of hard to tell the difference. It is actually kind of hard to tell the difference, and it's even more difficult to tell the difference if you're doing a computer to do this. So we spent a few years trying to figure this out. Turns out there are more complications. Your heart rate also increases if you're doing physical activity. So it's not just that when you're getting nervous, it increases. Also, a few other tasks can increase your heart rate. So another few years to figure that part out. Fast forward 10 years later, we have an algorithm that can do this. So we now have an algorithm that can do this. It's a patented algorithm. It measures heart rate from smartwatches, and it can tell us the level of arousal while accounting for all those other issues like motion. Does it actually accurately detect arousal? Well, the answer is yes. We've done a couple of studies to look at this in the lab setting. And without motion, we're at about 95% accuracy within 4 seconds, which is really important if you're doing real-time intervention. When there is motion, the accuracy drops a little bit to 85%. OK, great. So we have this cool technical thing. It detects arousal. Does it actually help? Well, we ran a randomized control trial in Pond to answer that question. We asked the kids to come in. We taught them a relaxation strategy. In this case, it was deep breathing. So for 3 sessions, we trained them on deep breathing. And the 4th session, we brought them in. We asked them to give a public speech. And we looked to see who actually initiated this deep breathing as a coping strategy. We also gave them Holly that could tell them their level of arousal. We had one group who got real feedback from Holly, and we got one group that didn't get feedback from Holly. What we found was that the group who had Holly, there was a higher proportion of kids who initiated their deep breathing. So all 14 of the kids initiated their deep breathing, versus 4 out of 8 for the kids who didn't have Holly. And those who did initiate their deep breathing, 11 out of the 14 said that it was because Holly reminded them to initiate their deep breathing. So this is all great news. From a technical perspective, we know it works. We did this test in the lab. We think that there is some effects. Great. What do we do with this now? So how do we actually present this to families? So we did a lot of consultation around what we do with this information. And we came up with this idea that we can provide the output of Holly either to kids who may have the coping strategies to manage once they get these types of alerts, or to caregivers. It could be parents or teachers who can help de-escalate states of arousal. We did a lot of work around understanding what this user interface will look like. So how do we actually present this information to the kids? Those of you who are familiar with CBT may find this figure familiar. So this is sort of a stressometer that basically if you're in the green, you're calm. If you're in the red, you should probably be doing some kind of strategy. And this was version 1. This is what we used in our randomized control trial. But then we did a lot of consultations with families and kids to see if this is actually helpful. And the feedback that we got was, well, this is one moment in time. What we really want is to see the context. So we went from this to a graph that basically visualizes these states of arousal over time. And that way parents can have the context, or kids can have the context of, okay, this is where I was 10 minutes ago, and this is where am I now. Is it going up? Is it going down? And here it is. That's me holding our product currently, which is Holly. So I'm wearing the smartwatch there, and the phone is displaying the actual output of Holly. So we did, again, a lot of co-creation with the community to see what other features may be helpful for families and for kids and educators. What we heard was families indicated a need for the ability to tag events. So if there's a state of arousal, what happened? Why was that arousal there? So that they can later understand and analyze potential triggers. Families and clinicians wanted historical logs to be able to see how things are evolving over time. And many of the families indicated that alternative form factors may be helpful. Not every kid likes to wear a watch, so how can we do this if somebody does not like to wear a watch? So this is some of the work that we've been doing to respond to those requests. This is the event tagging option. So we now have an option on the app so parents can add comments. So here you can see there are comments around, maybe there was some frustration with tying the shoes or argument with a sister, and that may be correlated with arousal levels. These are historical logs, so you can go back in the calendar and look exactly what happened. This was particularly interesting for some of the behavior analysts that we consulted with, so that they can look to see if there are particular patterns in time and space that may be correlated with these states of arousal. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip this video, but basically it shows you how this works. To summarize, this is what's happened in the past 10 years. So all the things that I talked about from 2012, when we had an idea around measuring heart rate as a way to look at emotion regulation, all the way to 2023, which is now, which we have this product that can actually be used by families. We still have a lot of work to do. So we've done all this testing in the lab, and things look good, but does it actually work in real life? We're conducting a community trial, a large community trial with support from OBI and POND and CIHR to look at how things actually work. And these are, very basic things like, my kid doesn't like wearing a watch, or my kid doesn't want me to see their feelings. So lots of interesting feedback that we're getting with this study. We're also looking at some implementation barriers and facilitators to this. Like my Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough, so I wasn't getting the alerts in real time. So these are some of the real-world challenges that we're working on right now. Shameless plug, we're still recruiting, so if you're interested, there's a flyer outside. You can get this QR code. More ongoing projects. We're co-creating the analytics dashboard, so we have this log that we're showing. We're still getting feedback from parents and families and clinicians about what other information they may want to see, what other forms they want to see it. So we'd love for anybody who has feedback to come and chat with us. We're also going to be running this in the medication management clinic at Hull and Bloorview to look at this as an outcome. So a kid is given medication or a change in their medication, what happens in between their visits. So they may not come back for 3 months. Parents can provide report on what happened during these 3 months, but is it helpful to have this sort of day-by-day measure of arousal and emotion regulation that we can present to the clinicians? So with that, I would like to thank all the families, all the kids who've been in these studies and given us all the feedback, who's helped build Holly so far, as well as all the funding partners and the staff in my lab. Thank you.
Maybe like the previous, we'll do 2 questions while Dr. Grable comes down and sets up her talk.
What about balance?
So that's a great question. Right now, we're not able to differentiate between positive arousal and negative arousal. So a couple of reasons for that. One, we're not finding a lot of specificity with the measures that we have, like heart rate, to be able to do that. And second, with the consultation that we've done with our behavior analysts, our parents, and our kids, we felt at the time that arousal is probably the thing that's very correlated with the regulation. Obviously you want the valence to be positive, but a lot of excitement can also Right. Okay, great.
Hi there. I was just going to say, like, how do you tag each event that you track? Like, if you have a 1 hour period, you could have 10 events, then you've had an identification for each one kind of tagged in that spreadsheet you showed. But realistically, how would you do that? You have any ideas on that?
So there are a couple of different ways. On the app, you get an alert every time the user goes in the red zone. So the parent or the caregiver or the user will get that alert. So that would be an opportunity to say, okay, this is what's happening right now. You know, we find that in many cases, you probably need to deal with the situation at the time, so it may not be, you know, reasonable to do that at the time. So you can also tag things post. So you go into the app, there's a button that says tag, and then you can say what time or click on the graph that says what time it was, and then you can add the description there.
One suggestion that I was going to say was my son actually has a Samsung watch, and I know you can record audio on it. And I'm wondering if you could, you know, program it to maybe do a soundbite of 1 minute recording around that event so that you can track it. Because, like, if, you know, like I said, if you have, you know, 15 events in a day or more, if you have an audio clip of that time, you might be able to determine, you know, because like you said, it's great to be able to note each time, but you may not be able to. So having something like that may be useful to identify the situation.
So that's a great point. We've been looking at different ways where we can get some context around those events. So the audio is one part of it. We've looked at how we can measure, for example, light levels or the number of people in the room, location, all those other contextual information. The challenge with doing this in the real world is some of the privacy concerns. So who else is in the room, what audio you're recording, how will you de-identify if there's sensitive information in that audio? So those are things that we're still navigating. But absolutely, context is huge, right?
I know that's a bit of a Pandora's box, but it's just a suggestion. And, you know, you might find some parents are willing to, you know, sacrifice privacy or whatever so they can identify each event more accurately. And maybe the actual audio kind of like situation that the child's under, the stress or whatever, you know, that you can tell a lot by that too. So anyway, just
right,
suggestion.
absolutely, and that's part of the co-creation that we're doing. So we're talking to parents, but also we're talking to, for example, clinicians, we're talking to educators, we're talking to administrators. So we're trying to view this from the different perspectives. Would love to hear feedback offline for sure.
No problem.
Great.